Let's talk terrorism. I want to begin by asking you a question. Can terrorism ever be justified? In other words, is there ever a time or a place where terrorism is validated? Well, to answer that question, we first have to agree on what terrorism actually is. According to the United States Department of Justice, terrorism is any premeditated, politically motivated violence carried out against non-combatant targets by secret agents. So, is terrorism defined as any planned brutality against civilians for political reasons ever justified? The answer is no. Regardless of what might be gained, there is never a time and there is never a place when terrorism is justified. Never. Terrorism is like rape. It is absolutely never acceptable or reasonable on any level. It is a cancer that must be cut out of society at its very roots before it spreads and leads to death of all humanity. Okay, so you might ask, is terrorism really so evil that there's absolutely no exceptions to its use? The answer is yes. Why is it so evil? Well, let's focus on targets of terrorists. We are talking about citizens. We are talking about the bloodshed of unarmed and unknowing citizens. Not armed soldiers at war. Also, although war may result in civilian deaths, those casualties are not planned. So terrorism is very different than military combat. Now you still think that surely some situation exists where terrorism could be justified. What about the idea of a greater good? Well, let's be clear. There is no greater good than protecting and valuing innocent lives. When a society begins to compromise this basic moral principle, they will begin to normalize immorality. So, bottom line, terrorism is never justified. The slaughter of 6 million Jews in Europe was not justified. The murder of 24 people in Egypt was not justified. The death of a mother sitting at her desk in the World Trade Center on September 11th was not justified. The bloodshed of an 8-year-old boy at this year's Boston Marathon was not justified. No, there is no justification for these acts. Murder to make a political statement is never reasonable. Whether that political statement is opposition to legal authority, military action, religious viewpoint, or whatever, it is never acceptable to murder civilians for political cause. Make no mistake, we as civilized people can never, and should never, justify such outrageous crimes against humanity. Terrorism is never justified.